It's a beautiful day to be in nature. Thought I'd show you what's going on. Here are a bunch of squash plants. These are really banging, as they tend to do. Looking good, nice big leaves. So I can talk a little bit about landrace gardening and sort of how that works. These are seeds that I saved, but the seeds that those plants came from are from a guy named Joseph Lofthouse, who is pretty notorious on the internet for doing a thing called landrace breeding, which is where you basically acknowledge that the best version of a plant that's going to grow in your garden is going to be one that is specifically selected or bred by the breeder to work best in your garden. And so what you do is you start with a broad genetic base of whatever it is you're growing. So if it's watermelons, you plant a bunch of different kinds of watermelons, right? This is what I have going on here. And that by doing that, you let them cross-pollinate and you replant those seeds, and you say, hey, what if what's going on here will do well, right? So you get a bunch of hybrids. You know that the hybrids are generally going to do well in your garden because they'll have a little bit of hybrid vigor if you get natural cross-pollination, but then you also get a chance to select out for what the good attributes are. So you say, this is a plant that's growing really vigorously. I want to save seeds from this. So you basically save seeds from the plants that one criteria, of course, is that it produces seeds, and that may seem trivial, but a lot of different versions of plants, right, maybe don't do very much at all, or don't even survive in your garden. That's the thing about Joseph Lofthouse. His whole deal is that he has, I think, about an 80 to 100 day growing season, so a very short growing season. And during that time, what he's doing is selecting for versions of the plants that will finish early and that taste the best and that do well in his garden, where he does very, very minimal weeding and does not use any chemical pesticides or apply fertilizer. And so he's breeding for sort of tough plants that do well in his area. And if anybody you ask who's ever, I think, planted some of his seeds, Joseph Lofthouse seeds, you can get them online. What anyone will tell you is that they really jump out of the ground. They are quick to get established, and that's because he's breeding for plants that do that. Plants that will be tough in the garden and that germinate quickly, germinate in cold soil even, right? So he's selecting for all these things that normally would make growing hard on his farm and in his conditions, which are high altitude in the mountains of Utah. So his seeds are very tough, and a lot of the genetics that I'm working with here have come from landrace seeds that I got from him. So when you buy seeds from him, another thing is that you are getting a genetically diverse population. This is not just an inbred cultivar or an F1 hybrid. An interesting thing is that it's great to use F1 hybrids in breeding your own land races because those, have two good parents and produce good offspring. And crossing an F1 with another F1, for example, you're likely to get something that's at least usable. And so anyway, that's the kind of idea there. He's not the only one out there doing landrace breeding, but he recently wrote a book about it that I'll review probably here later. I think it's very cool. It's the sort of thing you can kind of just read once and then kind of pick up, open any old page and take a look at, maybe get a new idea. But it's sort of a radical approach in contrast to the way that most people do it, because you are breeding a population, right? And that can be a population that is tall or resistant to whatever your pests might be, or whatever sort of predators might be eating your plants, things like that. And so you can make some pretty big jumps in a period of a relatively short period of time. Joseph claims that within 3 years, right, things start to really pop as you start to see, right, the genetics, the deck gets sort of reshuffled a few times, and you start selecting for sort of tougher traits in plants. So here's an example of something I've got going on. This is soybeans, and this is not one particular cultivar of soybeans, but a bunch of different ones. Here you see it sort of growing freely in a patch of clover, right? So pretty weedy, but these were seeds that were just dropped on the ground, literally just dropped into this clover and other stuff that I have going on here. And that is sort of my breeding goal with soybeans, and has been for a couple years now. I'm also trying to get some of that wild version of soybeans, the wild ancestor to soybeans, to get some of that pollen and maybe get a few hybrids, so I can see what I can do to bring back interesting traits into soybeans. But again, the idea here is mix up a bunch of cultivars, right? So different versions of soybeans, right? And when you get a seed catalog, you know, there's a bunch of different versions of cucumber or whatever. And you can be as sort of picky or as liberal as you want. So for example, if you wanted all pickling style cucumbers, you could just, you know, mash up a bunch of different pickling style cucumber seeds, plant those, let them cross-pollinate, and you'll likely, right, get a bunch of diverse but yet still generally pickling cucumber type things, and you can grow out from there. Here we have got a bunch of melons here. So this is a few Korean melons, which I'm pretty stoked to try, but also just regular muskmelon or cantaloupe. Got a little bit of corn growing in there. I have sort of I just kind of, you know, throw around corn seed, and if it happens, it happens in areas like this. Maybe it'll grow up on the corn. We've got some more stuff going on here. Here's some more watermelon. This is the loft house Landrace here. So as you can see, there's 3 plants here, and they're not all exactly the same, but they're all, of course, generally watermelons. So those seem to be doing okay. Some soybeans there. Got some Cucurbita maximas. These are Japanese kabocha type pumpkins, but this is the maxima family. These I have a little trouble with. They don't seem to like the humidity around here, but that's something that I'm anxious to get going because I do like the flavor. Kabocha, you may have had it in tempura or something like that, if you've had that at an Asian restaurant recently. Let's see. What else? Here's some more Cucurbita maxima. These are, I think, a landrace of Native American origins. So those are generally not doing too bad. But yeah, sometimes when it rains, and I'm not quite sure what's going on, but they'll just all suddenly die. And that's happened to about half of the maximas in my garden. I know that they're kind of notoriously tricky to grow in this area, so I don't have super high expectations. But what happens, and when it does, I'm going to start building my own landrace of the maximas. I've already, for a little while here, had the buttercups going on here. Again, most of these are descendants from the loft house moschata, so Cucurbita moschata landrace that he's got going on, and I would recommend that if you would like to try a landrace seed, sort of your first one, and if you really want to have your socks blown off, because these things really go crazy. And in Kentucky here, This is one of the few versions of squash that I think really, so butternut and that general, right? The shape, he's kind of, again, so one interesting thing is that Lofthouse is pretty sort of agnostic towards shape. He's like, it can be whatever shape it wants. I just want it to produce and taste good, right? He is picky about shape for other things though, like for example, a crookneck yellow squash. He's like, I don't know, I expect a yellow crookneck. It's just what I want, you know. So you can be as picky or as liberal as you want. As you see, there's a bunch of corn growing here. This is corn that was just thrown onto the grass. I had some barley growing here before that, and after I harvested that, the corn came in. So this is no till, no dig, throw the seed on the ground. You can see that it did really well over here where there's a lot of clover, and it's generally looking pretty good. If you want to see what the roots look like, because it's, you know, it seems kind of crazy to say that you can just plant corn by throwing it onto the ground, but it actually works pretty well because it's a big seed, so it kind of jumps out pretty quickly. It jumps up out of the ground and outcompetes most grass. Clover obviously is no problem, but yeah, let's take a look at the roots of one of these. How about this one here? So you're wondering, what do the roots look like when you sow corn just directly onto the ground? And you can see this is just about as sturdy as any sort of corn plant that I've grown where I have buried the seed, you know, the normal depth that you're supposed to. And yeah, this is, again, this corn's a Landrace that I've been working on. Basically just, you know, you take a bunch of flower corn seeds, if that's what you're going for, of different varieties. Corn's a good one because it outbreeds pretty regularly, pretty promiscuous as a plant, and so you get a lot of pollen swapping, and then you just say, right, whatever's tough survives, whatever doesn't dies, and it self-selects out of the population. So that's kind of the idea. Let's take a look in here. Let's see what these are some pretty big ones here. Let's see what it looks like underneath. So yeah, you can see there's some air roots as well as just regular roots. And I have just been subtly, you know, pushing the genetics towards this kind of toughness. Again, for about, not too seriously, but for, you know, 3 or 4 years now. I'm basically just saying what will grow with the most neglect and still produce seeds, what will still sort of contribute to the gene pool. And it's been pretty fun to see how much you can get away with, how much you can get away with not doing, which again is sort of a key. I think that the Landrace breeding combined with a lot of those Fukuokan techniques, that's a pretty powerful intersection of ideas that, although Fukuoka alludes to the fact that his rice, for example, his famous rice that he was growing was not like a variety. This is not a variety that you would find on the shelves anywhere. That this is basically, you know, had been selected over time to do its thing at the right time, selected for, you know, whatever sort of toughness, conditions he was breeding in. And that's the general idea. Here again, right, whatever corn happens to have made it. Got tomato plants all over the place. Again, I'm doing a similar thing with tomatoes. Just saying, you know, if you are tough and I can throw a seed on the ground and you make it, welcome to the club. A lot of this is Matt's wild cherry. Those who have grown it know it volunteers like crazy if you get volunteer tomatoes at all. Here, you know, tomato basically grows like a weed. You'll survive. There's volunteer tomatoes everywhere you look. I do spread some seed. If you're saving your own seed, you do end up with a ton of seed, which is cool because then you can say, hey, I'm just going to throw a bunch out this way and see what happens. So here's cucumbers. I'm doing trellised cucumbers as well as crawling cucumbers over there. I think in the long run, crawling is more kind of punk rock and easier to adapt to subsistence level gardening. But you know, people love these kind of cucumbers. Cucumbers don't do super well here. You'll see that, right? There are entire plants that have kind of just dropped off. Here's one. And that tends to happen at some point or another. So I'm sort of subtly selecting for that. These are all named cultivars that I planted, so these are normal. These are not Landrace cucumbers. But over there I've got some growing on the ground, some loft house cucumbers, and we'll see how they do. A little tougher, maybe crawling on the ground as well. Eggplant always gets eaten up. This is basically the first successful eggplant that I've ever grown here in Kentucky, because as you can see, it gets eaten up big time. So that's one that I'm looking for a tougher version of, maybe down the line. But it's weird because tomatoes don't get eaten and peppers don't get eaten at all. Here's some peppers here, what kind of serranos. So this should be turning red, some of them, in a minute here. And some more stuff. I'm a little, late on a lot of transplanted stuff. It's just so much easier to get lucky, with something happening, direct seeding, and just kind of spreading seeds around. Here's a Cucurbita maxima that's still alive, so knock on wood. Let's hope that happens. Here's a carrot plant that's flowering. Carrots, I have not figured out a way to get a lot of them, using the sort of lazy gardening methods that I want to be able to use. So I'm trying to grow out a bunch of carrot seed. There's some more over there as well, and just really inundate the sort of seed bank in my garden. Generally, spreading seed all over the place, seeing what will get lucky with carrots, and kind of going from there, hoping to find something. Timing seems to be a little tricky with carrots. Of course, they have tiny seeds, so it's hard to get a tough version of them, because no matter what, it's just going to be a tiny carrot seed, so that's something I'm looking forward to working out in the future. A good carrot landrace would be very fun to have. I do like having carrots. But yeah, you can see carrots do happen, right? Here's one there. There's another one right here. So yeah, they do happen just by kind of throwing seeds out. I take a pretty chill approach to weeds, as you can see. Got some sweet potato growing here. Haven't really taken off quite like I would want it to. These are some direct seeded and just seeds thrown on the ground. Squash that are going to come up. These are also descendants of the loft house zucchini. Sorry, zucchini, not squash. It's these terms. This is a Cucurbita pepo, if we're really being specific. Strawberries still coming in little by little here. Blackberries doing pretty well. Still getting a few of those. This tree I got to cut down eventually. I got a few branches off of it, but nothing quite yet. Here we got asparagus. Not much to say about that. Horseradish I kind of neglected, so it's getting a little eaten up. This is all volunteer tomato here. So yeah, and that's wild cherry. Maybe something else, we'll see sort of what the genetics bring. Some natural hybrids, hopefully. This is loft house Landrace moschata right here, butternut, squash, and I mean, yes, truly prolific. You can see down here, here's one already. There's one there. And these are not ones that I planted super early. You know, his whole thing is if you can't direct seed it, then what's the point, you know? He's breeding for being able to direct seed, which is cool, because I'm all about just throwing seeds on the ground. Here's a moschata, another one there, that grew from just throwing seed on the ground. Here's one, another one that grew from just throwing seed on the ground. There's another one there. Of course, here's some tomatoes. We'll see, you know, if anything interesting comes up, cool. If not, just chop it down. Here's another view of sort of the cornfield. Again, this is kind of just marginal, what I call my marginal land. And by that I mean that it's just, you know, trees, and that it doesn't get quite as much, doesn't get as much sunlight as these more high sunlight areas. So I get more sunlight the further I go this way in my garden. A lot of people ask about this one, so I'll show you. This is a Japanese root called gobo, or burdock. Edible burdock is the English name. And it is gone to seed. You normally eat the roots, but I am building up a landrace of this, which should be pretty interesting. Again, just using, you know, normal commercial cultivars. Normally you're pretty safe for using F1s, although there is issue with male sterility, because that's how they make F1 hybrids when it comes to things like brassicas. So if you've seen how a brassica flowers, you know that it creates lots of tiny flowers, and it would be too tricky to hand pollinate each of those flowers and make sure that it's not pollinating itself. So what they do is employ a trick where they get plants that are male sterile, which basically means that they don't produce any male pollen. So then you can be guaranteed that it's going to get female pollen from, or it's going to get male pollen from another plant. Anyway, so you will end up with male sterile plants, which is not a huge problem. In the long run, Lofthouse, he's like, I just want it out. Why would you breed plants that you know are inferior? So he selects out for it. I am trying to, as far as I know, I have not used any F1 carrots, for example. That's another one where you have to be careful. Brassicas and carrots, I think those are sort of the main ones where they use male sterility to make F1 hybrids. So you do want to be careful of that if you're trying to avoid male sterility. If you don't, I mean, it's not the end of the world. You might want to roll it back a generation, if you do find it. Another thing you can do is just look at the flowers, and there's a way to do it. I don't know exactly what it is, but Joseph Lofthouse explains it in one of those tutorials online. So there's the book that he wrote. There's also, if you want to just check out his blogging that he did for Mother Nature, or Mother Earth News, I think it's called, where he sort of outlines how you do landrace breeding in a blog. And I thought I read those and was like, hell yeah, this seems easy and intuitive to do. And any landrace seeds that I've sort of bought from anyone else tend to do really well. And I'm doing my own landraces here. It is fun to save seeds and see sort of what you can get. Here is soybeans. I'm trying to do a landrace of soybeans. They don't cross-pollinate very easily because they have flowers that are designed to pollinate themselves. But I'm trying to roll back that trait to make open flowers, to reintroduce open flowers, so that we'll then promiscuously pollinate each other, so that you can then make really big moves really quickly in terms of landrace breeding. So once you get something that outcrosses a lot, it's really easy to do landrace breeding. You can do landrace breeding with stuff that doesn't outcross very much, but it might just look like sort of a bunch of mixed up cultivars with the occasional hybrid. If you can spot the hybrids, pick them out, promote those in your seed mixture, and replant. And that's basically it, right? You're testing, right, for what are the most delicious plants, saving seeds from those, taste as you go, and it's all pretty intuitive in the same way that, right, our Native American predecessors bred a lot of these, right, outbreeding plants as well, right? Think about squash, highly outbreeding, and they have done amazing things with that. Corn, of course, highly outbreeding. Again, very cool things done with that. Potatoes are interesting because most potatoes grown now are grown by clone. But potatoes, when they're grown in their native environment, which is high altitude in the Andes and places like that, they produce flowers and they outcross. So one thing that people who are interested in plant breeding are doing is trying to grow potato from seeds. And these, what I've got here, these are TPS, true potato seed plants that I planted from seed. So it looks kind of like a tomato seed, but you can buy potato seeds. It's highly genetically variable what they do, which is really cool. One thing that's kind of a bummer is that they don't produce seeds again here in this climate. I don't remember exactly why, maybe day length or something, cold temperature, but it just isn't really the climate for most potatoes to set seeds. So, but here I've got some unique cultivars of potatoes. So these are 4 potato varieties that don't exist anywhere. When you grow potato from seed, you basically get a genetically completely new version of a potato. And so I'm gonna grow these out again next year. They're a little bit small, and see what I got. And it's a bummer that I can't get any seeds out of them, but maybe I'll send some to someone who lives in a climate where they do produce seeds, because it would be cool to see. It would be cool to grow potatoes that are freely outcrossing. And again, the more outcrossing it is, the quicker you can get to selecting towards attributes that are going to work for you, right? And that means not just the conditions in your garden, but also things like right, the pests, what sort of fertility you're dealing with. For me, fertility is not much of a problem. I use the JADAM liquid fertilizer method for that, and that's basically where you stuff a bunch of organic material in a garbage can or a bucket and fill it with water, and then you just draw off of that water. The plant material seeps into the water, and you have a water-soluble liquid fertilizer, which coincidentally is pretty close to probably the way that a lot of these plants were traditionally bred to grow in, right? More specifically, probably human manure as the primary fertilizer for a lot of these plants historically. This is certainly true in Asia. I highly recommend, Young-Sung Cho's book, JADAM. You can get an ebook version of it on Amazon. That's what I got. And he really lays out, there's a really simple way to do it. I can kind of show you what I've got going on here, which is basically just the garbage can method. And what you'll do is, I will warn you that it smells crazy, but you stack a bunch of stuff down, and then, it's, of course, you can imagine what it smells like. It's not good. Definitely want to maybe wear some gloves if you're really going to be dealing with this stuff. But that you will get this liquid. A lot of it has sort of seeped out. But you then pull out this liquid, and what I would do if I was to pull liquid today is just pour some water into here, and then you can take that, and that is your fertilizer. That is kind of your liquid manure. You can do some amazing things with it. You can pour it onto a patch of hard dirt, and it will quickly turn into soft dirt. At least around here, that's how it works. The worms come, and really they will eat up and soften the soil, because what worms crave basically is that liquid nutrient, right? Because worms just kind of swallow soil and then poop it back out. But what they're really looking for is that water-soluble nutrient. There's one corn that got started way earlier than the rest. This is a volunteer. It's already tasseling out. Jerusalem artichoke over here. This is one that does super well. You don't need to worry too much about it. Also in the JADAM book, they claim that it has pesticide-like properties. And you can sort of see, there are not really very many holes in the leaves here. It's generally pretty immaculate, despite the fact that it's all planted way too close. I planted Jerusalem artichokes and then did not harvest any tubers, and so it came back in this giant block, which is basically becoming kind of invasive. I probably will harvest some Jerusalem artichokes this time around, but that's one that's very easy to grow. It seems to almost be more of an issue of how to not get it to grow after a certain point. So yeah, that's definitely at its tallest, taller than me. Here's a mound, a hugel culture mound. I don't know if I made it the right way, but it's doing all right. I don't know. Some stuff does not exactly thrive. But yeah, there's some squash that aren't exactly kicking ass, but we'll see. A little more time on some seedlings, some stuff I got in kind of late. Peppers, though, you know, I'm not too worried. They'll still produce by the end of the season, even if they're this small right now. That's just kind of how it goes. Again, direct seeding is mostly what I'm headed towards. When I think about how much time I waste, well, the time I spend putting stuff into little pots, making seedlings, I'm trying to breed away from needing to do seedlings as much and more towards just being able to throw seeds out. I do occasionally do seed balls, as Fukuoka is famous for, but even Fukuoka a lot of times was just direct sowing things like rice seed. So he was not doing seed balls for everything. And what you'll find is that just throwing seed on the ground often is enough, especially if you have a lot of seed to spare, which I do because I'm always just saving seed. Even doing just a little bit of seed saving can get you a ton of seed, and that's good to have around. You can trade with people. Here's a carrot that's made it. So yeah, these carrots that are tough and really get out quick enough to overcome some weeds, that's sort of what I'm subtly selecting for as I go. There's things like this, throwing out cucumber seeds. One thing I do every once in a while is just take all my jars of seeds and put a pinch of this, a pinch of that into a bowl or something, and then you have kind of this founder's mix where it's like you can take it out into your field, into your garden, and say what's going to work. Just to, a dash here, a sprinkle there, and say, hey, is there a chance for anything to go on over here? Is anything going to happen? What might be suited for this area, right? And that's a big thing that Fukuoka advocates for, is letting nature kind of answer the questions for you, right? So your questions might be something like, where is the best place to plant this squash, or these kabocha, or these potatoes, or something like that? And then just saying, well, let's take a random sample and see what does well, right? So that can be direct seeding, throwing seeds out, throwing them out of seed balls, things like that. Whatever works for you. You get what you select for, and you got to be aware that there is often a lot of inadvertent selection that will go on as well. And by that, I mean that, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you don't even think about that's going to sort of alter the nature of what your population looks like. Here's some celery. Getting a little shaded out by this Jerusalem artichoke, but it looks pretty good down there. Celery. Not something I've had a ton of success growing, but again, that might be a fun one to try and do a landrace of. Grow out some of my own celery seed. I highly recommend, you know, trying a little bit of seed saving. And, you know, don't be precious about, oh, if it's a hybrid, it's not going to breed true. Well, yeah, you know, sure it won't, but it'll probably be pretty close to what you got before, or at least it's going to look like its grandparents, if not its parents, to some degree. So, this is the garden. Thanks for hanging out.